The Iran-Contra affair was a political atrocity that occurred during Ronald Reagan's presidency in the 1980s. During this time, select members of Reagan's administration had been involved in selling weapons to Iranians. This act was considered such a scandal because Iran was a known enemy to the United States. In addition, the profits received from the sale of weapons had gone to funding Nicaraguan rebels, despite the fact that the Boland Amendment had banned such acts. When the Reagan administration was initially addressed on the topic, they denied even having knowledge of its occurrence. However, one possible explanation was eventually given. During the early to mid-1980s, a militant group referred to as Hezbollah had taken 6 Americans as well as 24 other Westerners as hostages in Lebanon. Reagan believed that by selling weapons to Iran, the Iranians would therefore influence the Hezbollah stationed in Lebanon to release the American hostages safely. The Iran-Contra affair, a controversial issue requiring numerous years and extensive expenses for its resolve, led to an uprise of scandal and secrecy within the government. These scandalous actions only came to a halt once the knowledge of the situation had been publicized and several investigations had been put into effect.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Ronald Reagan had one of the greatest impacts upon the American political system during his stay in office as the nation's 40th president. Reagan was in office for 8 years and completed his term in January of 1989. Overall, Reagan was well liked and supported due to his various accomplishments. By the completion of his term, nearly 68% of Americans found Reagan's performance to be satisfactory. 71% of Americans approved of his handle on foreign relations, and nearly 62% of the population was satisfied with his methods of handling the economy. Reagan had explained his legacy as the Great Rediscovery, a rediscovery of our values and of our common sense. Although Reagan's tactics and intended policies seemed to center upon economic recovery, he had instead stumbled upon a national crisis that produced contrary results. Barely after his integration into the White House, Ronald Reagan found himself tangled in an ongoing arms exchange, a crisis better known as the Iran-Contra affair. The Iran-Contra affair primarily stemmed from several events that took place in 1979, during Jimmy Carter's presidency. At the time, the U.S. extended its assistance to the Shah in Iran to provide medical treatment for a lymphoma pandemic. Dedicated followers to the Ayatollah Khomeini, the previous leader heading Iran, were outraged at the United States' supposed ties to the Shah. These relations directly translated to United States support and approval of the Shah in the eyes of Ayatollah's followers. In response, radical Iranians posing as students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took nearly 66 Americans as hostage. This crisis heightened tensions between the United States and Iran. These restrained ties had carried over into the remaining terms of Ronald Reagan's presidency. January 20th, 1984, Iran declared itself as a sponsor of international terrorism. As a result, the United States launched Operation Staunch. This enabled the United States to urge its allies to refrain from shipping arms to Iran or committing similar transactions. In March 1984, Hezbollah, a fundamentalist Shiite group that sympathizes and supports the government of Ayatollah Khomeini, grows hostile towards the U.S. They claim that the U.S. metaphorically placed a wall between them and the nations that could provide them with weapons. They kidnapped 7 Americans in response. The Reagan administration then implicated a method of exchanging hostages for arms. The proceeds that the U.S. received went to aiding a group known as the Contras, short for counter-revolutionaries. Administration official Oliver North, Vice Admiral John M. Poindexter, and the Director of Central Intelligence, William J. Casey, were responsible for unknowingly sending the proceeds to the Contras. Poindexter and North attributed this secret divergence of funds to exponentially increasing tensions between the United States and Cuba. Instead of fighting the Cubans directly, William J. Casey said that this offered an alternate proposition. The Nicaraguan Contras aimed to undermine the Cuban infrastructure. By aiding the Contras, the U.S. would be able to avoid direct conflict with Cuba. Congress was unsatisfied with the Reagan administration's decision to aid the Contras, claiming that the group was fighting against other Nicaraguans instead of following their proposed attack against the Cubans. Reagan's administration continued to aid Latin America despite the pleas of Congress. Reagan's aid to Latin America made the United States the world's largest debtor. A suspicious Congress and population speculated Reagan's true intentions and involvements. When first addressed, Reagan would plead that he was clueless to these accusations.
Our government has a firm policy not to capitulate to terrorist demands, that no concessions policy remains in force. In spite of the wildly speculative and false stories about arms for hostages and alleged ransom payments, we did not, repeat, did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages, nor will we.
Further along in his presidency, Reagan claimed that he was merely trying to establish amiable relations with Iran.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
It wasn't until several years later, in 1986, that Reagan came clean to the public and his entire administration.
Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will try to fix you.
America will never make concessions to terrorists. To do so would only invite more terrorism. Once we head down that path, there would be no end to it.